Good morning, everyone. Before we start with the paper presentation, let me thank the organizers who invited me to share this session. Also, I would like to congratulate all the organizers, especially Dr. Shubhra Jamwal, all the participants and all the paper presenters to be part of such a great intellectual gathering. Today in this session, 5 papers will be presented, and the name of the speakers are Dr. Kusmita, Dr. Kulal Moliam, Mrs. Bindya Rahi, Ms. Satnam Mandal, Dr. S. Esther Juliet. I hope all are present here. Before we start with the presentation, I would request to all the speakers not to exceed more than 10 minutes, and question answer session will be followed after each paper. Now I invite Dr. Kusmita to present her paper. Over to you, Kusmita. Where is she? Kusmita, is she present?
Yeah, आप रुको.
Ma'am, yeah.
Okay. Am I audible?
Hello, am I audible? Hello.
Yes, yes.
I hope I am audible. This is Dr. Kushumita Mukherjee Devnath, Assistant Professor, Rajganj College, District Jalpaiguri, West Bengal. I have prepared a presentation which I would like to share with you people. First of all, a very warm good morning to all the esteemed dignitaries present. Just 1 minute I would like to take. Yes. I'm not very adept at this. So kindly please excuse me if I have a little bit of a problem. Hello? Somehow I can't connect to my PPT. Is anybody there to guide me? Hello?
Yes, yes. Dr. Kusumita, can you start sharing your screen? Now it's not visible actually.
Hello?
Yes, Dr.
Shubhra, could you please help Dr.
Yes,
Kusumita
yes,
with the
Dr.
technical?
Kusumita, are you using a phone or a laptop? There's an option of present now there. Can you see? Dr. Kusumita, we are not able to hear you. Yes, exactly. Now you open your PPT.
Is my PPT visible?
Yes.
Could you please tell me
Yes,
whether my
yes.
PPT is visible
Yeah,
or
it
not?
is.
Yes, it is visible. Yeah, perfect,
Hello?
perfect. Please.
Perfect now.
Oh, you you don't have to come back. You have to continue with that only. Yes.
Yeah.
The topic of my paper is, I don't know whether my PPT is visible or not. I'm not getting any response, and I'm sorry if my PPT is not visible. I beg your pardon and sincere apologies for holding everyone. For holding everyone. I'm really sorry. So the topic of my paper is looking at the epic from the margins, rediscovering Pattanayaks, Sita, and Jaya. So, in this paper, what I have discussed is that I have discussed how the two glorious Indian epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, have been reinterpreted by the eminent mythologist Devdutt Pattanayak in his reinterpretation of Mahabharata, which he calls Jaya, and Ramayana, which he calls Sita. So before moving on to the main paper, it is my duty and responsibility to explain what is indigenous literature. Of course, we are into the third day of this conference, and I'm sure most of the eminent speakers have addressed this topic. But still, I would like to bring into light a few points. The term indigenous literature has been variously defined as folk literature in the form of oral literature deeply embedded in the cultural ancestry of a country. The term is widely associated with Australian Aboriginal literature, Native American and Chicano literature, Mi'kmaq literature, Mohawk literature, Anishinaabe and Ojibwe literature, among others, in Canada, where the native voices want to establish a distinct identity apart from the dominant Eurocentric one. In their book, Constructing a New Canon of Post-1980s Indian English Fiction, Sahadev Luhar and Madhurika Chaudhary have discussed the need of establishing a full-blooded mainstream Indian English writing divorced from any hangover of the British colonial experience. This process would not only involve writing but reading practices as well. These reading practices would have to read text not from the Western perspective but from the indigenous standpoint. So that's why, in order to create a distinct Indian identity, the voice of the indigenous tribes becomes so very important. And that is why I chose to talk about the most discussed, the most thought about, the most revered epics of Indian culture, Ramayana and Mahabharata. Now, when talking about Indian literature in English, the most important point that comes to mind is regional literature. Because apart from the main crux of Indian writing in English, there are very many talented regional writers who play a very important role in shaping the literary history of India. And to bring their predominance to fore, translation plays a very important role. Now, Indian English literature in translation roughly indicates the various tribes, indigenous tribes, and their tales being translated into English, being translated making it possible to reach to a very, very wide audience. Now, let me come to the most important person of my paper, which is Devdutt Pattanayak. I would like to discuss how he translates and rejuvenates by uniting the loose strands of the very many interpretations that have been, immersed in the main epic written by Vedavyas and Valmiki. Now, he has taken a lot of pain in collecting all the popular retellings of the epics by the indigenous population. Shishir Kumar Das. Now, I would like to talk about this critic Shishir Kumar Das, who has observed that the process of translation itself is a means of the stigma generated by Westerners against the value of India's classical heritage. He writes, the magnitude and frequency of translations from Sanskrit into different Indian languages may be partly explained as a scholarly strategy towards the dissemination of Brahmanical learning and Indian classical heritage, and partly as the assertion of indigenous literary tradition against rapid westernization. So basically, Sisir Kumar Das, who is a very noted Indologist, he has pointed out that the stigma that had been generated by the Westerners against the mediocrity of Indians' classical heritage can only be withdrawn, can only be taken away from the popular consciousness by the magnitude and frequency of translation from Sanskrit into different Indian languages. This can be explained by the dominance of the Brahmanical learning and Indian classical heritage. You know, Sanskrit was basically a language of the Brahmins. So that is why Ramayana and Mahabharata were also basically thought to be a property of these privileged classes. But slowly over the time, the supremacy of the Brahmins reduced, and slowly but surely the voices of the indigenous tribes came into force. They adopted these two great epics and incorporated into their own culture, adding various colors and flavors to the already existing elitist epic that was there. So it was basically an epic of the privileged classes, but now the indigenous cultures came and started outpouring their own creative energy into it, adding a distinct flavor and their own personality to the mainframe. Pattanaik has translated the two of the epics. I have just shared for you the two covers, Sita and Jaya. Pattanaik rightly claims that European scholars in colonial times viewed the epic through the colonizer's gaze, with the civilizing mission at heart. They tried to deduce it along racial terms, always contrasting Aryans, the North Indian kings and princes like Ram and Lakshman, versus the demons whom they equated with the dark-skinned Dravidians. They also pointed out the marked difference between the Vishnu devotees, Ram and his band of followers, and the devotees of Shiva. Pattanaik has also accused American scholars who in post-colonial times have preferred the Savior's gaze. They too have found faults in the way in which gender and caste conflicts have been treated in the epic. So, why is Devdutt Pattanaik's translation so very important? Because he is an informed Indian living in the post-colonial times. So, he has this distinct privilege of knowing the civilizing mission, the colonial mission of the European settlers. They had always tried to impose the idea of European supremacy on our minds by showing that Ramayana was nothing but a racist epic in which the North Indian kings and princes like Ram and Lakshman were fighting against the Dravidians who were, regressively portrayed as demons by the North Indians. They also pointed out that it was an epic of a clash between the various clans of the Hindu religions, the Vishnu devotees and the followers of Shiva. Vishnu devotees here obviously means Ram and his band of followers, and that of Shiva, that is Ravana. Pattanaik has not only talked about the British scholars, he has also pointed out that American scholars who in post-colonial times have preferred the Savior's gaze. They too have found faults in the way in which gender and caste conflicts have been treated in the epic. Pattanaik tells us that the various Indian retellings of the same epic have happened We come to know that the regional retellings of this epic began after 1000 Common Era, the first specimen of which was done in South India by the 12th century. Later, in the 15th century, it was done in the east, while even later, in the 16th century, it was done in the north of India. So, he not only informs us about the various interpolations of the Ramayana,
Sorry, Dr. Kusmita.
from where this actually began.
Dr. Kusmita,
Delve
please
a
wind up
little
your
deeper and
paper.
see how Patnaik has shown how indigenous culture has tried to redefine the elitist outlook of Valmiki's Ramayana. The first point that I'm going to discuss is about
Please,
the divine
Kusmita.
origins of Ram. Popular
Kusmita?
imagination about Hindu mythology has always put forward the idea that
Are you
Ram is
listening?
no ordinary mortal. But Patnaik points out that this was not Valmiki's original intention for him at all. He
Please
assures
come to the
that
conclusion,
till
Kusmita.
the 5th century Common Era, Ram was hailed as a human hero.
I repeat,
Points
please
out
come
that
to the
only in
conclusion.
the 12th century, Ram comes to be equated to God because of the interpretation of Ramanuja. So we see how indigenous tribes have contributed in making the normal human hero, originally destined to be just a prototype of a king living a normal human life, and placed him on a pedestal, made him a god. Similarly, the origins of Sita have also been rediscussed by indigenous people. For example, the Valmiki Ramayana states that Sita is a foundling whom King Janak adopted. Now, this obviously we have read from our very childhood. Now, in Pattanaik's translation, we find mention that in an oral retelling of Sita's birth, we learn that Shiva guarded Lanka for a while and dropped some ash one
Hello,
day near one of its
Kusmita?
gates, from where
Hello?
sprang a tree. Somehow, a branch of the tree ended up in Mithila, where King Janak
Kusmita?
performed a yagna with it. And
Kusmita,
from
please
that very yagna,
come to the
Sita
conclusion.
emerged with a bow. In that bow was written that whoever managed to break it would become Sita's
Kusmita.
husband. Now, for you people, I have collected a few covers of the different versions of Ramayana that have been created by the indigenous tribes of India. For example, the first cover is the Ramayana in Bengali folk paintings. The next is also another cover of another interpretation, regional interpretation of Valmiki's Ramayana. Another trend is there in indigenous reinterpretation of the epics, the attempts to rationalize. Now, if we see the character of Sita, who is supposed to be the embodiment of goddess Lakshmi, when she does something as irrational as hanker after the golden deer, it becomes really, incredible. How can a woman who is supposed to be the incarnation of a goddess act so stupid? So, in the Bhil Ramayana, we have this interpretation where Sita, seemingly irrational behavior, is rationalized. In this rendition, Sita has been described as being angry with the golden deer for having destroyed her garden. That is why she becomes upset.
Kusumita?
Attempt at reconciliation
Kusumita?
can be seen in the case of Kaikeyi's behavior in a version from Assam. So Kaikeyi, the villain mother of Ram, who actually forced him to embrace the Vanvas, that is the banishment from his kingdom Ayodhya, that act of Kaikeyi is also being rationalized in the interpretation from Assam. Here it is seen that Kaikeyi's decision to send Ram away is not because of selfish motives, but because of a desire to protect him.
Next. Hello?
Please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I think Kusmita has completed her paper.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Kusmita. Now I invite audience for any query or question. Only one or two question will be raised.
I think there are no questions.
Okay. Then I invite Dr. Kulal Moliam to present his paper. Dr. Kulal Moliam. Is he connected?
Yes.
I think he should start his paper as the time is running fast. Dr. Shubhra,
Yes, ma'am.
is he presenting?
He was here. Yes, he was here earlier, but
Okay.
I don't know. All of a sudden,
Okay.
Then can we move to the next speaker?
Yeah, I
Yes,
think so.
yes.
Okay. We will hear Dr. Kulal Moliam when he will be able to connect. Now we come
I
to.
think he is connecting.
He's started.
Okay. I think he is connecting.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
He's sharing his screen. Doctor, I think you're not able to share your screen. Can you present your paper like this without your PPT if you can? Are you there? We're not able to hear you also. Ma'am, I think there is some technical problem in this. We can move ahead.
Okay. Then now I invite Mrs. Bindia Rahi to present her paper. Dr. Bindia.
Vidya, unmute yourself.
Vidya, please unmute yourself.
There's a mic.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, all of you. Today I am going to present my topic.
Please be a little louder.
Okay, ma'am. The topic of my presentation is the mythical approach of the duende through the forecasting presentation of Andalusian folk by Federico Garcia Lorca. Federico Garcia Lorca, who was born in 1898 and died in 1936, was the most controversial dramatist in the history of Spanish literature. The dramatic inclination was inside his nerves of this can be noted through the early childhood when his father gave him a puppet theater as a birthday gift, and he started his first performance with the help of his servant and his relatives. He wrote several poems that were based on Andalusian folklore, along with revolutionary crafting of the Spanish plays. Lorca was not only got popularity in the field of musicians, but also noted for his surrealistic um, drawing collaboration with Salvador Dali. He used the language of common people with their outstanding folklore. He was that person who identifies and places it as the real value of Andalusian folklore. The most eminent attribute of his work is his great commitment to Andalusia. The word Andalusia is a Moorish in Spanish foundation that is derived from Al Andal- Andalus, which is given by the Muslim during the Middle Age to the Iberian Peninsula. The genesis of Andalusia folklore is considered from 1500th century under the rule of Moors who have reap the advantage of Islamic advances in philosophy, medicine, flamenco tradition. Lorca was attached to this land since his birth, but this place has achieved its pride and fortune after the cruel reign of Fulgenist in 1975. The fatality of Federico Garcia Lorca and Andalusian flamenco came into shine after Spain has become the part of European authority in 1986. Before giving information about his lifespan, Lorca and its relation with the mythic world, I will cast your attention to describe the history of Andalusian flamenco folklore. Flamenco is an original art of Andalusia, the result of influence and miscegenations of various cultures such as Gypsy, Arab, Jewish. It, it integrates music, song, and dance, and at present, this artistic expression is appreciated and practiced all over the world. It is also the fact about the heritage that it has been listed at intangible cultural heritage of authority humanity by UNESCO in 2010, with its great influence on the way of on the way of expressions of emotions through the art of flamenco. Federico Garcia Lorca was expert in using the flamenco folklore in the poetic volume poem of Cante Zondo, that is spoken flamenco, whereas he described the scope of Yanar in the forms of gypsies' life, with the moon echoing in hills and their dream-like effect of folk narratives through the language of Arabian and the Persians, and these elements can be easily understanding of his famous poem Tamarit Diwan. And here I'm quoted some lines of his poetry that are as follows. Hence, in the night where they go, they command silence of dark rubber and fear of fine sand. They will go where they will, hiding in their heads and a blurred astronomy of abstract gun. The pattern of Andalusian flamenco is based on the music of guitar. It is totally based on the musical approach of guitar. That is a mixed form of cante zondo. With the help of emotions through the performances, while they used to dance by clapping their hands together with stamping their feet on the ground. Its history is taken from the gypsy culture from southern Spain, and they were the migrated people of Roma from Rajasthan, located from the northern part of India. They left their land and brought their musical instruments like tambourine, bells, wooden castanets, and traditional crafting of songs with dance performances. On the accounts of these performances, the Andalusian folklore can be categorized into three categories. The first one is the cante. It is usually based on complex of 12 beat rhythm and considered as the oldest one. And the theme of this style is related with death, frustration, and jealousy. The second one is the cante intermedio, is a hybrid form of Andalusian flamenco in which fandango is usually danced by couple. It begins with the solo with the rhythm marked by castanets, clapping of hands, shaping of fingers, and the stepping of feet with the speed gradually pauses for a while, and dancers stand rigid until the music resumes. The third category of this cante zondo tradition is the cante chico. This form is used for the celebration of a special occasion or deals with comic distance. So it is opposite of above two genres. It is based on the theme of love and happiness and has a poetic meter of three or more single pitches. After a thorough study of flamenco ballet, it can be illustrated that the performances are lucidly distributed according to their motives, such as male dancers are associated with the valor and they used to wear the intricate footwork, whereas the female dancers called ballerio, and the background song is generated from with the help of guitar. The setting of the song is consistent with the scene it represents. Flamenco folklore was being the favorite to Lorca, and he used it as avant-garde of Spanish culture, Spanish literature. Whether it is touched the height of dramatic intrinsic background or concerns with the atmosphere of his poetic creations, nothing has remained untouched by Garcia Lorca. He went to meet gypsy dancers to explore his knowledge about it, and the name of that famous dancer was Medina, by whom he pushed his thirst for flamenco culture. And she expressed her exciting encounter through the following statement. This is having inspired with those, he collected his ideas to woven into a poetic volume entitled Poem of Deep Song when he was 20 years old. He collaborated with his friend Manuel de Falla, and their work divided into sub-branches, sub-branches of Cante Zondo tradition. The Spanish adopting the Vengesium liturgical chant. The Sarkarian, the arrival numerous bands of gypsies. Lorca's Cantizondo has been distributed into four stages. The Gypsy Caesarea. Caesarea stands for sadistic tone or verses for four hexasyllabic.
Excuse me, Bindia. Conclude your paper within 2 minutes.
So the next category of next category of his style is Dunit. Dunit is the facial expressions of any performances. Here, there which he expresses the concept of death or concept of frustration through the characterization of his character, through his characters. The Blood-Wedding Yarma and the House of Bernarda Alva are the example of his rural trilogy that is totally based on Andalusian folklore, and it is full of mythical coincidences. And the duend is that is also a kind of myth in Spanish culture. So this is from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you for presenting in within the time frame. Now the house is open for discussion. Any query or any question? I think no question. Should we move? Okay. Now I invite. I think Dr. Kulal Molial is joining us.
Yes, I am ready, ma'am. I am ready.
Okay, then you present your paper. And Bindya, thank you for your paper, and it was a very good paper also.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hand over to Kulal.
Hand over to Dr. Kulal Molial. Dr. Kulal Molial, please.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I hope the PPT is not being shared. Anyway, shall I do it even without PPT?
Yes, madam. If you are not able to share your PPT, no problem. We can have the oral presentation also.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I will do it. Even
Thank you,
without
ma'am.
PPT, I will do it. Good morning to everyone. I am very happy to be a part of this 3-day international virtual conference on Indigenous Studies. I express my thanks and gratitude to Cape Comorin Trust for having given me this opportunity. The title for my paper presentation today is Motherhood in Madhi and Paru of Rajan Krishnan's When the Kurinji Blooms. Madam, I hope you are able to hear me. Madam, am I audible? Madam? Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Yes, we can hear you. Carry on.
Yes, I will proceed. So this paper is about Rajan Krishnan's When the Kurinji Blooms. Let us have a knowledge about Rajan Krishnan. Rajan Krishnan is one of the most eminent Tamil writers in Tamil Nadu. She has contributed nearly 80 books to Tamil literature. She is a prolific writer of fiction, essays, biographies, short stories, and travelogues. She has won many literary awards like Sahitya Academic Award, Kalaimagal Award, Thiruvika Award, etc. Rajan Krishnan as an indigenous writer. Rajan Krishnan is a famous women indigenous writer of Tamil Nadu. She is a social activist who supports tribal people and their living. She brings about the hidden facts about the tribes through literature. She mainly focuses upon tribes who are living in the mountains of Tamil Nadu. She uses literature as a tool to explain how the earth loses its native people. When the Kurinji Blooms. When the Kurinji Blooms is actually a translation of Rajan Krishnan's Tamil novel by name Kurinji Tale. It has been translated into English by Uma Narayanan and Prema Sitaraman. Let us have a glimpse of When the Kurinji Blooms. The novel When the Kurinji Blooms spans 50 years of 3 generations of Padaga people living in the Nilgiris mountains. The word Kurinji in the title of the novel When the Kurinji Bloom refers to the bright blue flowers that blossom in the shrubs once in 12 years in the Nilgiri hills. The Badagas use the term Kurinji to denote a 12-year period. In Tamil, the novel is titled Kurinji Tale, which means from Kurinji. Mother Earth. When the Kurinji Blooms, Rajan Krishnan makes ample references to Mother Nature as a living being, So Earth is considered as one of the human beings. Jogi, the central character of this novel, upholds the ecological values of interconnectedness and interdependence. He is a dutiful son who cares for Mother Earth. Jogi considers plants as his children and land as his mother. Nilgiri. Raja Krishnan depicts a panoramic view of the Nilgiri. Actually, Nilgiri is a small district in Tamil Nadu. Different types of tribes are living there. Some of them to be mentioned are Kodas, Kurumbas, Todas, Padagas, Irulas, Paniyas, Mullukurumbas, etc. Nilgiri is called the Little Switzerland due to its beautiful scenery. Nil is the Tamil word for blue and Giri is the Sanskrit word for hill. It is because of the blue color of Kurinji flower that the Nilgiri hills are called blue hills. Padaga tribes. Let us know something about the Padaga tribes. The Padagas are socially, educationally and even economically well advanced in their lifestyle. Compared with the other hill tribes, the outstanding characteristic of the Padagas is their progressiveness. Their dwellings, cultivated lands and general mode of life manifest the superiority of them. The main characters in the novel When the Kurinji Blooms are Jogi, Paru, Rangan, Madi, Lingaya and Krishnan. Motherhood in Madi. Now I am coming to my title. Madi, the wife of Lingaya, is a docile woman who accepted the patriarchal rule of the tribe and was always willing to abide by the rules and regulations laid by her husband. She willingly accepted the rules even during times when she labored a different point of view or opinion. So she is a person who doesn't oppose her husband. When Jogi has been selected as the temple priest so that the mother has to be separated from the son for nearly 8 years, she has the pain of leaving her son. But even then she didn't oppose her husband. So she's a very dutiful wife. She lives her life of duty even after being separated from her only child and remains calm and composed during her separation. Madi, an epitome of love and affection. Madi lives her life as a dependent on her husband and after the death of her husband, dependent on her son. She represents the past and leads a life within a small circle where her family is the priority. And when her daughter-in-law Girija was unable to bear a child, she is torn between the love for her daughter-in-law and the urge to establish a lineage. Ultimately, her love for her daughter-in-law wins and she does not ask her son Jogi for remarriage just for the sake of begetting a child. To that extent, she shows her love even for her daughter-in-law. Husband is the world. After the death of her husband Lingaya, Madi ages soon due to her sorrow for her husband's demise. So her husband's death had affected her so much that she feels that she becomes aged very soon. This shows that her husband was her world and she feels lost after the death of her husband. Let's move on to the next character, Paru, in the title. Paru, when the novel starts, she is a very young girl, very beautiful girl. She represents the mid-generations of the Padaga women. Madi represents the past generation of the Padaga women, whereas Paru represents the mid-generation of the Padaga women. And this Paru is again a very dutiful daughter, obedient daughter, and even though she has expressed her love and she has great love for a boy called Krishnan, she couldn't reveal it. So that when the elders say that he is the one who is to be married to you, she accepts it without raising any against them. So this shows that the women had no voice against the men who decided on their behalf even in the matter of marriage. Paru as a pawn. Paru has been used as a pawn by her husband Rangan because he used Paru as a pawn in order to inflict pain on Krishna because he knew very well that Krishna was in love with Paru once before their marriage. So, and she is also used as a pawn by the elders, knowing very well that Paru is in love with Krishna. They go about with their own rules and regulations and customs of the village that Paru has once again been used as a pawn by the elders. Paru as a dedicated mother. Paru, that is, Girija, after delivering a baby boy, she dies, presenting her child as a parting gift to this girl, Paru. Paru had lost her daughter already because of plague. Now she becomes a dedicated mother to the a small boy Nanjan, and she looks after him and cares for him in such a way as though Nanjan is her begotten son. So Nanjan also calls Paru as mother, and she turns into an absolutely dedicated mother to him. Motherhood in Paru. Motherhood is willing to sacrifice everything which is dear to them. She has great love for her land, but Paru is willing to depart with the land because the headmaster of the school where Nanjan is studying is asking for the land to be donated to them because it will help in the future of Nandan, in the education of Nandan, and she had also done it. So that shows that she has got great motherhood. And the difference between Madi and Paru, Madi belongs to the previous generation, whereas Paru belongs to the mid generation. Paru is the one who has been caught between two generations, the previous one and the future one, because the Nanjan belongs to the third generation. So just like that, you can see.
Madam,
I am
Madam, please conclude your paper.
Pardon, madam? Yes, I am concluding. I have come to the conclusion. So Paru had a peaceful death in her own land. She died in the land itself, a peaceful death. This shows that Padaga women, how much they care for children, how much they care for the land they possess. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, madam. Any question, ma'am?
Paper and a well-researched paper. Congratulations.
Thank
Now
you.
I invite any suggestion or question for her paper presentation.
Any question, madam?
Any question, please? It was a good presentation, and
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
I
Thank you.
think someone should ask her about her paper.
Because this is presenting about Tamil Nadu and the tribals in the Tamil Nadu. No question, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay. Ma'am. We will wind up.
Now we proceed to the next paper.
Yes, thank you.
I invite Satnam Mandal for presentation. Madam, hand over to Satnam ji.
Yeah, ma'am, I am here. Am I audible, ma'am?
Okay. Please carry on.
Okay, ma'am, just wait. I have to share the. Ma'am, is my slide visible?
Not. Yes.
Hello, ma'am.
Please
Hello,
start.
ma'am.
Yes, yours.
Please carry on.
Is my slide visible, ma'am?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sanatan Mandal. I am pursuing PhD in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences in IIT Patna. And the title of my presentation is Orality, Oral Tradition and Naga Culture, a critical study of Eastern Kirez, Sky is my father, a Naga village remember. Before going to the further discussion, I will elaborate the terms, what is orality and how oral narrative is intimately related to the term orality. Actually, in his book, Orality and Literacy, Walter J. Wang defines orality into two categories, primary orality and secondary orality. And actually, orality is the verbal expressions of thoughts and ideas in a pre-literate culture, who are totally untouched by modernity. And another term, if you look at the term oral narrative, then we know that oral narrative is the spoken story. And what is the importance of orality and oral narrative in any culture? Actually, oral narrative or orality preserves cultural diversity, and it also protects minority or indigenous culture. It also plays a crucial role for the reconstruction of history in an indigenous culture, and it also determines what is important about a group's past and what influences the thoughts, actions, and practice of its members. Now I will come to define another term, what is oral tradition. Actually, we look oral tradition. Oral tradition is also a part of oral culture. Javasina, in his book Oral Tradition as a History, says that oral tradition is both a product and a process. By the process, he means oral tradition is the way of transmission of the verbal messages which is prevalent in any indigenous culture. And by the products, he means oral history, myth, folklore, etc. And this oral tradition plays a pivotal role in creating the indigenous literature. In any indigenous writer, indigenous writers are so much indebted to oral tradition in order to create any kind of literature. And regarding this, Jana Saigluniska, in his article Oral Tradition in Native American and Australian Aboriginal Culture, says that oral tradition and storytelling represent a crucial part of all the indigenous cultures, to an extent that many contemporary writers of indigenous origin, after years of silence, have been striving to incorporate many key elements of the oral traditional storytelling into their writings, not only to preserve them, but also to make them understandable for contemporary generation of native and non-native writers. And this kind of oral tradition is also prevalent in the writings of Northeast Indian writers. And I will basically deal with the writing of Isterin Kire. And we know that the contemporary Naga culture is not pre-literate or illiterate. They are literate and still they have oral culture. So I will define them literate oral culture, which is also defined by the writer, another prominent writer from Northeast India, who in his writing orality says that they have literate oral culture. Yes, actually the writer's name is Temsulau. Temsulau talks about that though Naga people are literate, they have still the keen tendency to their oral culture. And Isterin Kire also feels the importance of orality, oral tradition, and oral narrative, and she wants to preserve them in her writings. In an interview, she says that, I felt we needed to create written Naga literature. We have so much oral narrative, but with oral dying out, it's all going to be lost. By this speech, he wants to say that by the touch of modernity, oral tradition is on the verge of extinction. And as a writer, she is trying to preserve the oral culture and oral tradition. I have chosen her first historical novel, which is titled as Sky is My Father, a Naga Village Remembered. The novel is set against the backdrop of the Battle of Khonoma, which was fought between the villagers of Khonoma and the Britishers. And the novel basically deals with how the villagers of Khonoma gives reaction to the colonial encroachment of the Britishers. And the novel also talks about how the Naga people are stuck to their oral tradition and how they maintain their culture. And at the same time, the novel also shows how the Britishers, in the name of modernity, dominates their culture by means of Christianity. And just in this slide, I am about to present that what kind of oral features are there in the writings. the elemental techniques of orality is prevalent in the novel Sky is My Father, A Naga Village Remembered. The novel is written in a storytelling mood. If we go through the novel, we find that it is written, it seems that someone is telling a story, and Sterin Kire mentions this oral technique in a very minutely. And embedded narrative is another element of orality which is prevalent in the novel. There are so many stories within the main plot of a story. Like the elders always teach the younger generation the story about the battle, the story of their village, the story about their oral culture, about their oral tradition, about their rituals. And the importance of personal memory also plays a vital role in oral tradition. And personal memory, the characters like the elders of the village, transfer their experience through their memory. And in the novel, it is found that oral tradition or orality acts as the preserver of culture, because by means of storytelling or by means of orality, history of the village, the history of hunting and the other heroic battles is delineated to the younger generation, and various rituals like tiger killing, Gena Day are prevalent in their culture, and these rituals are transmitted from one generation to another generation by means of orality. And the story of the spirit world is also narrated by the elders. And the most important fact is that oral tradition and orality creates a cultural consciousness in the mind or in the community of the Angami Naga people. When they learn about oral tradition, when they come to know the importance of oral tradition, when they perform very respectfully their ritual, they grew up some kind of cultural consciousness. And when they listen to the histories of the battle of their predecessors for their land, they also imbibe reverence for their land. And this also creates some kind of historical consciousness in the people. And in the novel, it is shown that oral tradition or orality creates indigenous knowledge in them. If we look at the title of the novel, Sky is My Father, A Naga Village Remembered, through their oral tradition, they want to understand their cosmos. They have great belief on spirit world. They think that sky is their father. And this kind of thought is reflected in the myth, which is also referred in the novel. In their culture, it is prevalent that man, spirit, and tiger are brothers, and that's why they kill any tiger, they perform ritual. So the two events reflects on the cultural myth of the Naga people or the origin myth of the Naga people. According to the myth, there was a primal woman who was impregnated by a single drop of rain, and from and that woman gave birth to 3 children: man, spirit, and tiger. And from that, from the primordial time, they feel connection with each other. Man feel connection with spirit world. Man feel connection with tiger. But actually,
Mr. Mandal, please conclude.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I want to conclude that. Actually, in conclusion, I want to say that the culture, the oral culture, is so much prevalent in the novel, but this cultural consciousness and this cultural ethos of the Naga people is deteriorated by the colonial encroachment of the Britishers. So when they come, they try to assimilate the native people. They try to tell them that our religion is superior. Please, they force or they try to compel them to take Christianity. They baptizes them, and to some extent, some characters in the novel, there is a character Levi who loses his cultural consciousness and he becomes Christian. But there are other characters who does not want to become Christian. They have great cultural consciousness and they want to stick to their culture. And Sterin Kire, as a writer, as an indigenous writer, focuses or try to preserve this culture through her writing or through her novel. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, Mr. Mandal, you presented a very good paper, and you can work more from the historical perspective also in this paper.
Thank you.
Now,
Yeah.
I think now open house is open for discussion or any suggestion you can give him. I'm audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay. Any question? Any query? Any suggestion? Okay, thank you, Mr. Mandal. Now, I invite Dr. S. Esther Juliet for his presentation. Dr. Esther Juliet, please.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Shall I present? Shall I present my paper?
Yeah, please carry on.
Right, ma'am. I will share my PPT. Is it visible, ma'am, my PPT?
Yes.
Thank you. I am Dr. S. Esther Juliet Sujata, Assistant Professor of English, Sri Sharda College for Women, Salem, Tamil Nadu. My topic is struggles of Dalit women and their unyielding willpower from the personal narratives of Bama, P. Sivagami, and Veerama. Caste system. India has been considered the most stratified of all known societies in human history with its peculiar form of caste system. The system is weird in the sense that it harbors one of the greatest separating forces that divides human beings into higher caste and lower caste. These sanctions help the caste system to renew its legitimacy even after it is challenged. As a result, the caste system, with its myriad variations of superordination and subordination, its confusions and contradictions, riots and rituals, vices and virtues, dogmas and doubts, professions and protests, is able to keep going itself across different regions of India, varying degrees of stringency. The Dalits are still, they are not accepted. The Dalits have been systematically neglected and ostracized in Indian society for ages. They are socially frail, economically needy, and politically powerless. Even though a small section of them have attained an economically and professionally strengthened position under government patronage, socially they remain downgraded and unaccepted. The prominent Dalit narratives or writers are Hazari Zaim Sem Freeman, D.P. Das, Balwant Singh, D.R. Jatawa, Shyamalal, etc. The Dalit writer, they want to use the personal narrative form and they want to create some identity for their exposure. Dalit men are victims of caste and class oppression. Dalit women find themselves as the victims of double oppression by the upper caste men as well as by the men of their own community. Their struggle is on the one hand for existence and on the other to protect them against hostile environment. This hostility pervades all spheres, at home as well as outside, and then their struggle is continuous. The biggest handicap of Dalit women is their lack of education. These women cannot write but can speak their woes before somebody who can write on behalf of them. Their humiliation, insults, hardships are nowadays exposed to the outer world by the writers. The prominent women Dalit writers are Sumitra Bhave, Josine Racine, and Jean Luc Racine. Bama, Sivagami are famous Dalit women writers. Bama has written 4 narratives in this autobiographical form. They are Karukku, Sangadi, Vanmam, and Manushi. Sivagami has translated her work Palayana Kalidalum under the title Grip of Change. Pan on Fire, Veerama, Life of an Untouchable, is a collection of oral narrative of Veerama's life. Karukku. Karukku is written by Bama. Karukku is an autobiography of the suffocation and the suppression of the trampled and the marginalized existence of a Dalit woman. Karukku means palmera leaf, and Bama finds many similarities between her strife-filled life and the saw-aged Karukku. At 26, Bama had taken vows to enter the convent in her zeal to serve her community. She was disappointed by church and the discrimination she had to endure on the grounds of caste. Bama thus leaves one community in order to join another. She presents the past and present through the conversation between her grandmother, mother, and herself. She connects the experiences and the studies and probes in that they are calls to endless action to create a Dalit perspective and explores a range of discrimination. Bama Sangadi. Bama Sangadi is a Dalit woman's history. The events are narrated by many female voices. She incorporates her own experiences with her maternal grandmothers, and also numerous Dalit women came upon truth in her narrations. The form of each chapter in this novel is exploratory. The narrator highlights the suppression faced by Dalit women. They are facing domestic violence, workplace exploitation in the fields, atrocity done on them by their drunken husbands, etc. The willpower of women is expressed in Vanmam. Vanmam is the third novel of Bama, and in this the author has presented the communal clashes between Parayar and Pallar. During the communal clashes, the Dalit men run away from the village. In their absence, the women have struggled hard to face the economic problems and overcome the atrocity done on the women by the police people. Now, I want to say that Bama is the living role model of though she come across a lot of problems, she became a good role model among Dalit women. Bama portrays the strong willpower and the boldness of her community women. Her stories are based on the real events in her village and portrayed by her. Bama realizes that education can be one of the antidotes to come out of the trampled shackles of sickening society. She comes out of it. She proves herself. She documents the events in her life and has turned to an eminent Dalit writer. Now I want to go to the next novelist, P. Sivagami. Her novel is Palayana Kalidalum. It is translated into English in the title Grip of Change. In this, the author has portrayed the humiliation in the name of caste. She says one of our Dalit women was beaten like a dog, and no one showed up that time. The women were considered to be lower than men. Everyone established their worth by pointing to those beneath them. In the educational institution also, she was humiliated because of her community. When a message was
Sorry for interruption, Sujata.
the scholarship
Please
money
conclude.
had arrived, and that yes, ma'am.
Conclude your paper, please.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. This, in all the three narrators, they have expressed the indomitable willpower of Dalit women. I want to conclude that Dalit women writings articulate the hurt and humiliation of the marginalized in an oppressive gendered society along with its consequential voices of protest. Dalit women are placed in the bottom of the social hierarchy. They are thrice marginalized. In all the personal narratives, the three Dalit Tamil narrators, Bama, P. Sivagami, and Veerama, have not only exposed the humiliation and the suppression of Dalit women, but also exposed their indomitable willpower to cope up with the reality with hope. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Any questions? Any questions? Any questions?
Anita ma'am, are you there?
Any questions?
Hello?
Ma'am?
Hello?
Yes.
Hello.
I'm audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Adam.
Okay, Sujata. Dr. Sujata, it was a good presentation. Thank you. And this is
Thank you, ma'am.
open for discussion. Any question? Rather, I invite any suggestion. Okay. I think it's time to conclude now. Dr. Shubhra.
Yes, ma'am.
Should we conclude now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. In this
You are not audible, ma'am.
hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. In this session, 5 papers were presented, and I congratulate all the speakers who made their presentations well in time frame. The first paper was presented by Dr. Kusmita, entitled Looking at the Epic from the Margins, Rediscovering Patnaik's Sita and Jaya, in which she focused on retelling and reinterpreting Indian epics from a new perspective. The second speaker was Dr. Kulal Molial. She spoke on motherhood in Madhi and Peru of Rajan Krishna's When the Kurinji Blooms. It projects the importance of motherhood for women in society through the characters in the novel Madhi and Peru. The next paper by Mrs. Bindia Rahi, titled The Mythical Approach of the Duende Through the Forecasting Presentation of an Andalusian Folk by F.G. Lorca. She gives the insight on the contribution of the Lorca. The next paper on orality, oral traditions and Naga culture was presented by Sanatan Mandal and Smriti Singh, portrays cultural and colonial history of Angami community through novels of Eastern Kir. And the last paper was presented by Dr. S. Ither on struggle of Dalit women and their unyielding willpower from the personal narratives of Bama, Shivgama, and Viramma, which threw light on plight of the Dalit and lack of education. It was a very wonderful, versatile interaction session. Once again, I say thank you to the organizers and the speakers. Thank you. Over to know Dr. Shubhra.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for chairing this session in such a wonderful way, and congratulations to all the paper presenters. So thank you once again, ma'am.